Good morning, all. And this is another video that pertains to my last video about how the U.S. Social Security Administration is looting the adult autistic population and then making all the double and triple dipping payments to people who already have a pension or two, and obvious fraud in massive fraud in paying millions of people who are over the age of 110 years old up to 360 years old, older than our country. So, any parent of an autistic child who is going to become an autistic adult, or an autistic adult who is still relying on the help of his or her parents, this video should be very concerning, because this is more of how the U.S. Social Security Administration and its administrative law judges are screwing over autistic adults in order to avoid paying Social Security disability benefits that should rightfully be paid and be due to the person over their adult life. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis is retrospective. What that means is if you're one of those 80% of females who went missed, undiagnosed, or misdiagnosed earlier in your life, and now as an adult you get what's called a late autism diagnosis, this should be of extreme concern, because it's my opinion. This is not verifiable fact, but I think there's enough facts of circumstantial evidence to make the inference this is what Social Security is doing, and that's why I have the opinion, my opinion only, this is what they're doing. I think that they are trying to screw the adult autistic population and not pay disability benefits to us in order to balance their Social Security budget problem. And I say this because I've seen some internal Social Security publications about the rising numbers of autistic people and autistic adults. And so I want to talk about my late autism diagnosis in 2009 and a Social Security, Jacksonville, Florida, OHO, Social Security ALJ decision I only received yesterday. Now, mind you, that before I received my decision from this ALJ, I received this response to my discrimination complaint against her. So the Social Security ALJ's decision, and this is a Social Security ALJ's decision, and this is a pattern of practice that keeps happening to me with this ALJ's office and the Social Security Administration in Florida, is that they supposedly date notices and date letters and issue decisions, and then it's dated February 13th, but you don't receive it till February 28th. And there's never an explanation why you're not receiving their notices and decisions until like a week and a half later, or half a month later. And some of these notices demand that you respond within 10 days. So this appears to be yet another abuse of the autistic population that's being perpetrated upon the United States autistic adult population by the Social Security Administration. This, I personally experience this. So, now, I have an autism diagnosis. Now, why did I get a late autism diagnosis? Well, because I didn't know about my childhood autism diagnosis until right before my mother passed away. And in January 2008, I was a passenger in a vehicle driven by my husband. We were stopped with the arms down at a railroad crossing, and some reckless at-fault idiot plowed into the back of our vehicle and failed to stop. And my seat restraint broke upon impact, threw me into the dashboard of the car. And I had around over $100,000 in injuries. Florida law required me to separate out pre-existing conditions from the car accident injuries. So because I was under that legal duty, owing to the insurance company, I asked my neurologist, Dr. Michael Hoffman, MD, at the University of South Florida's Department of Neurology for an autism diagnosis, autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. And so on April 8th, 2009, Dr. Hoffman made a medical report that is my autism diagnosis. And here it is. This is at the University of South Florida, April 8th, 2009. And this is my autism diagnosis under the caption assessment, high functioning autism with splinter, well, it's supposed to say savant traits. And then it says some more things. It says that I have markedly impaired verbal abilities, but visual spatial remains exceptional. And it's signed by Michael Hoffman, MD, and this is at the University of South Florida. So the April 8th, 2009 medical record autism diagnosis wasn't the only medical record I had by Dr. Hoffman. Now, Dr. Hoffman sent my family an ADI-R test, the ADIR autism test, and that's considered the gold standard in diagnosing ASD, autism spectrum disorder. So I sent an email with a subject line, the ADIR, have you scored it yet? Dr. Hoffman, have you scored my ADIR autism test yet? Notice, this is on an email, usf.edu, so this is in possession of the University of South Florida. From that email, on that account, subject line, the ADIR, have you scored it yet? And then he's talking about he scored it. So, my medical records at the University of South Florida Department of Neurology and Dr. Michael Hoffman clearly include an email medical record with the subject line, the ADIR, about scoring it, and proves the existence that Dr. Hoffman and USF had an ADIR ASD diagnostic test that Dr. Hoffman sent to my family, and my family filled out, and that he was scoring it. So that is an authentic and genuine copy of Dr. Hoffman's email, and it proves that an ADIR diagnostic autism spectrum disorder test was given to me and is the basis for my autism diagnosis. But there's more. So now we look at a second email where I emailed Dr. Hoffman at usf.edu, okay? And I referred to the autism diagnosis dated in the medical report of April 8th, 2009. And Dr. Hoffman wrote me back in an email. It is in the possession of the University of South Florida and its Department of Neurology and its records custodian. And Dr. Hoffman refers to the April 8th, 2009 medical record as an autism diagnosis. He says it's a clinical diagnosis, always has been, and he is not going to change that. And he signed it. Okay, now let's talk about the screw fuck job the Jacksonville OHO Social Security Office ALJ Kelly Fitzgerald did to me in her February 13th unfavorable decision denying me the adult autism financial supports and services I need and that I did not receive until February 28th, 2025. So, ALJ Kelly Fitzgerald says, with respect to autism spectrum disorder, I have reviewed the historical records and could not find evidence to establish the existence of autism spectrum disorder. Although the claimant has a history of reporting autism and sources have repeated this report as a diagnosis, that's referring to Dr. Michael Hoffman's April 8th, 2009 autism diagnosis, that his medical records in his email states in his own words as an autism diagnosis, and for which the basis was the gold standard ASD diagnostic test, the ADIR. There are no specific clinical findings to establish this condition as a medically determinable impairment, and even if there were, there are no specific limitations noted. Indeed, notwithstanding her alleged autism diagnosis, she reported graduating from law school and passing the California bar. So, the Jacksonville office, Social Security OHO office, and ALJ Kelly Fitzgerald, administrative law judge, basically said my autism diagnosis was merely Dr. Office notes and not an autism diagnosis. So, the ALJ included a list of exhibits including the medical records that I asked her to obtain for this decision. Put in this evidence log, the ALJ obtained office treatment records from the University of South Florida, more office treatment records and progress notes from the University of South Florida, which includes the April 8th, 2009 autism diagnosis. Did she or didn't she, the ALJ Fitzgerald, obtain in those records my ADIR test and its scoring, the gold standard diagnostic test for autism spectrum disorder, and the 2 email medical records written by Dr. Hoffman that says, number 1, has a subject line of the ADIR, which is proof it existed, and that he gave it to me and he was scoring it, which is the basis for autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, and another email that in his own words is referring to my autism diagnosis as an autism diagnosis. How much more clear can it be than my diagnosing ASD doctor's own words, written in his own words, that I have an autism diagnosis? Well, apparently not clear to Social Security's ALJ Fitzgerald. She couldn't understand the words autism diagnosis was an autism diagnosis. This is how Social Security is screwing, fucking, and cheating adult autistic people in the United States who desperately need their financial supports and services. And it's Social Security's the place you get them. At the same time, they're looting the autistic population. They are taking those monies and giving it out to double dippers and triple dippers with pensions. So they have more. Because they're greedy, they get more. And giving it to supposedly millions of people who are over the age of 110 years old to 360 years old, older than our country's existence. So, I mean, this is just a debacle. Now, I learned and watched a couple videos by a Social Security attorney, Walter Hanat. They're on YouTube. And he has two videos, at least, talking about that in 2023, Congress started demanding to know all about these AI programs Social Security Administration is using now. And I guess that was Congress's, first learning that they were using them. They've been using them since somebody way back in the 1990s, like 1993, which was the first time my claim was denied. A claim my mother made on my behalf because she was my caregiver, made on July 7th, 1993, before she passed away. It's riddled with misinterpretations of my autistic language, as are just like every ALJ decision that I receive from Social Security. This one by Fitzgerald is massively riddled with misinterpretations. And so apparently, according to Attorney Hanat, in his YouTube videos, there are at least 23 AI programs Social Security Administration is using to help them decide if someone who's an adult making a Social Security disability supports and services claim should receive those benefits. Apparently, what's not fed into their AI is the 86% national unemployment rate of autistic adults in the United States. Because the way this decision reads, you sure wouldn't know it by this ALJ's take on things. In addition, just like every portion of what she had to say and how she analyzed it and what she decided to deny supports and services I need as an autistic adult was based on her saying I do not have an autism diagnosis in the face of these records from the University of South Florida Department of Neurology and my doctor, Michael W. Hoffman, MD, that he used the gold standard autism spectrum disorder diagnostic test, the ADIR, that's the basis of his diagnosis, and that he, in his own words, says it's an autism diagnosis. So this ALJ deciding that I did not have an autism diagnosis apparently had a Social Security investigator, or I guess they call them, CDR or something, investigators, get involved in investigating me. there are around 30-ish in number of this investigator contacting me, so-called, and giving information. And you can just see them here from the ALJ sending it from the Jacksonville OHO office. And I mean, more and more and more and more and more of them. And she's got all these dates here. And more of them. 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 And then the ALJ says that I'm typically riding horses, training horses and jumping horses daily, and actively competing in equestrian terms, and providing riding lessons. And then she says that she has also concluded that I am a not essential hearing witness, so I don't get to participate in my own hearing and testify. And the decision is issued based on the evidence of record. Okay, that includes all of these Michael Hoffman, University of South Florida records, including the ADIR and Dr. Hoffman's own words saying this is an autism diagnosis. And so by saying I don't have to be there to testify about my disabilities in this hearing, I also don't get to have my witnesses. And then the ALJ says that there are multiple references to the claimant working as a horse trainer, and then she makes this criminal accusation against me. Hence, there is the possibility of unreported earnings. So, this administrative law judge sent out one of those Social Security investigators to where I live. And she's making this accusation on me that I'm supposedly going to horse shows, tournaments, I'm teaching lots of riding lessons, and doing all this income earning activity, and then makes a criminal accusation on me, which gets fed into the AI of the Social Security Administration, which is now under audit by DOJ, that there's the possibility of unreported earnings. Okay, you have to have proof of that if you're going to accuse an autistic adult of a criminal charge like that. And since this ALJ was sending out a Social Security investigator to where I live, then we would have to expect that if that's true and it's not defamation on its face with malice, in a Rehabilitation Act of 1973 retaliation against me to make a completely unsupported criminal accusation against me, that the ALJ would have in hand video or photographic footage of all the riding lesson students I am supposedly and allegedly giving these riding lessons to, as well as photos or videos of these riding lesson people handing over cash and checks to me to pay for those riding lessons. And then, of course, the Social Security ALJ, an investigator, you would think before they defame somebody with malice, would have obtained my bank records so they could match up these so-called, supposedly alleged and existing checks that their video would show, writing students handing over to me, being deposited in my bank account and records. Well, guess what? There aren't any. There are zero. They don't have that proof because I haven't been giving any riding lessons. That's part of the problem. So I don't have any of this so-called income for the so-called criminal accusation that's defamatory with malice on its face, that they're so-called unreported earnings. Now, that means it's frivolous and vexatious. And this ALJ Kelly Fitzgerald made those completely, factually, and evidence unsupported, totally baseless criminal accusations against me as an autistic adult because I asked her for an autism translator for my hearing, and she decided, in the face of my autism diagnosis record she had, the ADIR test my family was given that's a basis for my autism diagnosis, the gold standard, and my own doctor's email, in his own words, saying it's an autism diagnosis. Those two words, autism diagnosis. Well, I don't know what that meant to that ALJ. Or if this is more of the screw fuck you the U.S. Social Security Administration is doing to autistic adults to loot them to pay the double, triple pension dippers so they can be greedy and paying out all this fraudulent money for millions of people over the age of 110 years old to 360 years old that Doge and President Trump are finding. So I just wanted to do this video because all you parents of autistic children who are going to become adults, who are wondering what happens to you when you pass away, since you might not be here while your autistic child continues to live on as an autistic adult, and all the other autistic adults who need these financial supports and services because of the 86% national U.S. unemployment rate, this is what Social Security Administration is doing to screw and fuck you to all the autistic adults. They are completely out of control. They are completely mishandling everything. And President Trump should frickin' shut them down and reform this agency, or Congress should do it, because this is an outrage. And if I really did what I'm criminally accused of doing, then I want the identity of the Social Security investigator, and if she has any autism training, I want her CV, and I want a copy of all the videos that show kids and adults sitting on a horse and me giving them riding lessons and then paying over money to me. That would have to be the factual support for a defamatory with malice accusation on me, criminal accusation like that. This isn't the first time in my life, and I'm sure like thousands of autistic adults can back me up on this, that we are found not credible. We are told we're liars. We are not believed by the neurotypical population. And this is way out of control. So, I asked ChatGPT about this. So I asked ChatGPT, and I believe this is 4.5, the following question. If a medical doctor tests a person with the ADIR and then makes a doctor report stating under assessment caption that the person has autism with savant splinter abilities, together with the fact state law required him to separate out pre-existing medical conditions, hence had to diagnose ASD from car accident injuries for an insurance company, is this an autism diagnosis? Now, we could have the battle of the AIs if that's what Social Security wants, okay? Because anyone withstanding like me could file, if they have to go to the federal court, another federal lawsuit about the flawed and discriminatory biased 23 algorithms Social Security is using to decide these claims that they didn't apparently, Congress didn't know about to 2023, and whether or not those algorithms have bias problems. or they're inaccurate. Anybody could do that. So we can have the battle of the AI, but I think ChatGPT 4.5 is a pretty accurate AI. I think OpenAI has designed very good AI. So here's what ChatGPT 4.5 said. Yes, this would constitute an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. The ADIR, Autism Diagnostic Interview Revised, is a standardized diagnostic tool used by professionals to assess ASD. If the medical doctor who is qualified to diagnose ASD conducted this assessment and explicitly stated in their report under the assessment section that the person has autism with savant splinter abilities, that is a formal diagnosis. Additionally, the fact that state law required the doctor to separate pre-existing conditions, such as ASD, from accident-related injuries does not negate the diagnosis. It simply clarifies its relevance in the insurance claim. The doctor's professional evaluation and written statement serve as the basis for the diagnosis. So then I asked ChatGPT 4.5, then how can a Social Security ALJ who had a copy of the doctor's autism diagnosis decide on the basis she failed to obtain the doctor's ADIR autism test, which her records seem to say she did obtain it, but she didn't list it separately. So I just asked, hypothetically, on the basis she failed to obtain the doctor's ADIR autism test, that I do not have an ASD diagnosis by stating, quote, additionally, I reviewed the historical records and could not find evidence to establish existence of social anxiety or autism spectrum disorder. Although the claimant has a history of reporting autism and sources have repeated this report as a diagnosis, there are no specific clinical findings to establish the condition as a medically determinable impairment, and even if there are no specific limitations noted, end quote. The ALJ bolsters her statement by saying, quote, she reported graduating from law school and passing the California bar, end quote, but fails to mention today is February 2025, and I graduated from law school in 1990 and passed the California bar with accommodations in July 1997. So this is what ChatGPT 4.5 had to say about that. It sounds like the Social Security Administrative Law Judge, ALJ, dismissed your autism spectrum disorder diagnosis by asserting that there were no specific clinical findings to support it, despite the fact you had a formal medical diagnosis from a doctor using the ADIR. The ALJ's reasoning appears flawed in multiple ways. 1, misinterpretation of evidence. If the ALJ had the medical report stating an ASD diagnosis, dismissing it solely because they did not have the raw ADIR test results is problematic. The doctor's professional assessment and written diagnosis should be considered valid evidence of ASD as a medically determinable impairment. Failure to recognize a medical diagnosis. The SSA's own rules require ALJs to base its decisions on medical evidence from acceptable medical sources, e.g. licensed physicians. If a qualified medical doctor diagnosed ASD, the ALJ should not have dismissed it without obtaining countervailing medical evidence. Historical misinterpretation. The ALJ claimed that historical records did not establish ASD, but an ASD diagnosis does not always require extensive historical documentation. Many adults, particularly those with higher functioning ASD or savant abilities, are diagnosed later in life. The presence of a medical diagnosis should take precedence over the absence of prior documentation. 4, irrelevant education achievement argument. The ALJ's mention of your law school graduation and bar passage seems like an attempt to discredit your diagnosis. However, many individuals with ASD are highly intelligent and capable of academic success, especially with accommodations. The fact that you passed the California bar with accommodations is actually evidence that you required support, not that you lacked an impairment. So, assuming, because I cannot tell from the evidence that's stated in the evidence index whether or not the University of South Florida records the Social Security ALJ obtained included the ADIR, I asked the question, would the appeals council Social Security Administration Appeals Council have to obtain the ADIR for me to develop the record. I do have emails with the doctor stating that he gave me the ADIR. Here's what ChatGPT said. Yes, the Appeals Council has the authority to develop the record further if it finds that the ALJ failed to properly consider important medical evidence. If the ALJ dismissed your autism diagnosis due to a lack of the ADIR test results, and the record shows the doctor did administer the ADIR, the Appeals Council may determine that the ALJ should have obtained those records before making a decision. Key points regarding record development by the Appeals Council. 1. SSA's duty to develop the record. Under 20 CFR Section 404.1512B1, subsection 2 little i's, and Section 416.912B1, 2 little i's, the ALJ and SSA in general has a duty to develop a full and fair record. If the ALJ questioned the existence of your ASD diagnosis but failed to obtain the ADIR results, this could be considered an incomplete development of the record. 3. Your emails as supporting evidence. Since you have emails from the doctor confirming that they administered the ADIR, these could help demonstrate that the ALJ made a factual mistake in concluding that there were no specific clinical findings, and the SSA should have obtained the ADIR results before rejecting your diagnosis. And so ChatGPT 4.5, in response to additional follow-on inquiry, said, yes, you've raised serious concerns about the ALJ's handling of your case, including failure to properly develop the record, ignoring relevant medical evidence, and applying improper standards for ASD evaluation. Let's break this down into key legal and procedural issues and then discuss what actions you should take. The ALJ's failure to consider your diagnosing doctor's report and ASD-specific evidence. What SSA ALJs are required to do. Under 20 CFR, Section 404.152OB and 416.920B, the ALJ is required to consider all medical evidence in the record, including diagnoses from acceptable medical sources. The ALJ cannot ignore medical evidence just because they do not have the raw ADIR results. If a licensed physician diagnosed you with ASD based on clinical evaluation, that should be sufficient. The ALJ also cannot ignore your childhood history when evaluating ASD. The DSM-5 and SSA both recognize that ASD is a lifelong condition and must have begun in early childhood, even if it was diagnosed later. What you can do now. In your appeal to the Appeals Council, argue that the ALJ ignored medical evidence and failed to consider ASD as a medically determinable impairment. Cite SSA's own duty to develop the record, 20 CFR Section 404.1512 and 416.912, and explain that the ALJ failed to meet this standard. So, obviously, I was very wronged by this Jacksonville OHO Social Security Office ALJ Fitzgerald. And ChatGPT 4.5 explains why. And I just want to put this video out there because this is just, I have a lifetime of this kind of thing happening to me. Primarily, first and foremost, because I am not being given an autism language translator. And in every court, in every agency, even when I go, if I try to go to a workplace, anything that I do, just going places in society, neurotypicals will use their neurotypical inference-based language and trying to read body language and facial expressions and all this stuff to infer intents that do not exist and this kind of stuff. It turns into 100% misinterpretation and misunderstanding. And I'm acting honestly in good faith. And my entire long lifetime of 68 years, this has been my lived autistic experience. Now, at some point, this needs to stop. At some point, enough is enough. Number one, at some point, these officials and people who do not have any autism spectrum educational training, they need to get themselves some. That's number one. Some autism awareness and acceptance. Number two, these officials need to stop misinterpreting and misunderstanding everything an autistic person tries to say with literal fact-based language, because it's very difficult for autistic adults like me to even get our words out. So, we don't need to be told we're broken and invalidated. And lastly, these neurotypical officials, on the basis of no evidence whatsoever, and misunderstanding and misinterpreting an adult autistic person's autism, if they're going to send out a Social Security investigator, then they darn well better send one with a camera. And if they're going to make a criminal accusation, like they defamed me with malice with the one in this report, then they better well have video and photo evidence that factually supports their accusation. Because otherwise, it's defamation with malice. And that's just wrong. It's bad enough. My lived experience as an autistic adult of 68 years has been being told that I'm bad, I'm wrong, and I'm broken, and everything I do is invalidated. But on top of that, to be told without any factual basis whatsoever that I'm a liar and maliciously defamed and accused of a criminal accusation for which there is absolutely zero factual support. Because I have not been giving these writing lessons that they claim. I do not have any income from having given these writing lessons and not reporting income that they're saying. And in addition, they haven't investigated my LLC Patrano Farm account to see if there's any writing lesson money being paid into that account. They've done nothing except make a defamatory with malice criminal accusation on me, not give me the exculpatory evidence, and did it to deny my adult supports and services as an autistic person. Horses are my special interest. They have been ever since I was about 6.5 or 7 years old. And I'll do more videos on that. The fact that my parents, my mother especially, tried to train my special interest doesn't mean I'm out there making billions of dollars like Elon Musk. It doesn't mean that. You better get the proof before you make the accusation. This is outrageous. And the Trump administration and Congress should remove this ALJ Fitzgerald for doing this to me for cause. Because sure as heck, she's either malicious and bad and vile, or she's incompetent. I feel really sorry for anyone else whose Social Security disability claims gets assigned to her and has to have her decide it. Because this is my experience, and the video and the evidence is what it is. It speaks for itself, and I'm sick and tired of being misinterpreted, misunderstood, and made accusations against me without any factual support that I'm doing anything wrong. And I think other autistic adults, when this kind of thing happens to them, to us, feel the same way. So, that is my video for today. If you like my videos, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, and you'll be notified of my future videos. And thank you for watching.